Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name's Andrew Barber, and I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News. And I just wanted to welcome everyone to today's presentation, which is sponsored by Fuel Education. And over the next hour, we're going to discuss how to implement a balanced literacy program. And by that, I mean a comprehensive instructional framework that allows teachers to meet the individualized needs of students while promoting reading growth among all students. And before I hand things over to our speakers for today, I'm afraid I'm going to inflict a couple of moments of housekeeping items on you, so bear with me, please. First, we are recording the event, and in a couple of days, we'll send out an email to everyone that contains a link to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any point during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A box on your console and hit the submit button. And I hope we'll have 10 minutes or so at the end when our speakers can address your questions. We also have a chat function, which you can find if you look down at the bottom of your screen at the blue group chat icon. Please use chat to talk among yourselves or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have technical problems with the console or any other concerns for that matter. But please don't use the chat function to ask our panelists questions. They're simply not going to have time while they're presenting to monitor the chat. So if you have a question for them, please use the Q&A panel instead. And with that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the first of our speakers, who will in turn introduce our second speaker. Kristin Trostel is a product marketing manager at Fuel Ed, and Kristin has more than 7 years experience teaching in a variety of schools. She's worked in traditional classrooms, at an inner city charter school, in an alternative high school, and as a virtual instructor. Welcome, Kristin. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hello. Thank you, Andrew. As everyone mentioned, my name is Kristin Trostel, and I work for Fuel Education, and we just appreciate your time today. At Fuel Education, our mission is to partner with schools, school districts to fuel personalized learning and transform the education experience. So Fuel Education provides innovative digital curriculum, technology, instruction, and support, enabling you to create a learning environment that's just right for your students. As you can see, we have a wide range of solutions for students pre-K through 12th grade, such as credit recovery, CTE, AP, world languages, instructional services, and supplemental solutions, of course, including Big Universe. And what I love about Fuel Education is that we can meet any online or blended learning model need. So today we have an exciting opportunity to hear from Dr. Jill Marin. Dr. Jill Marin is an experienced staff developer who has collaborated with teachers and administrators in schools across the country to implement customized education solutions. Prior to joining Fuel Education, Jill was a classroom teacher in Pennsylvania. Jill is a certified reading specialist and holds a master's degree in elementary education and reading from the University of Pennsylvania and Westchester University, as well as a doctorate in cognitive studies of reading from Widener University. Welcome, Jill.
Great. Thanks, Kristin. And thanks, everybody, for taking some time out of your day to join us. So I wanted to get started with just a quick look at the general state of reading achievement in the United States. So I wanted to start with the NAEP scores, so the National Assessment of Educational Progress. These scores were recently released, and this is an assessment that's given every 2 years to students at grades 4 and 8, and about every 4 years to students who are in grade 12. So students in grades 4 and 8 were assessed in reading in the 2017 school year, and these are the results that were just released. So we have the 4th grade results that we're looking at here, and I just wanted to highlight right up top here, 2017, that only 36% of our 4th graders are proficient or above. That's it, just 36%. So some of you may have seen these scores before, but some of you may not have, so you can just let that sink in for a moment. And the next one I'm going to pull up is just the 8th grade results on the reading NAEP assessment. But before I reveal that, I just wanted to get some input or get people thinking out there in the audience. So what do you think is the percentage of 8th grade students who are reading at proficient or above in the United States? So again, 4th grade was 36%. And I'll give I'm trying to give 30 seconds, but I didn't start counting. So I'll give a few more moments for folks to get a chance to input your responses. And let's see the results. Okay, so most people picked the 26 to 50%. Some picked 0 to 25, and a few people picked 50 to 75. The optimists, because not anyone was overly optimistic with 76 to 100. So let's see the scores for 8th grade. It's actually the same statistic. It's 36% of our 8th graders are proficient or above. So this is, just one measure of reading achievement in the United States, but it is a highly regarded measure that has been used over a long stretch of time. So they are fairly accurate. And I do encourage you to check out the Nation's Report Card website because they show data by subgroups, and there are a number of achievement gaps that are worth being aware of as well. So we do have some room for improvement in reading instruction. So why are we here today? So we're here to hear a bit about balanced literacy. So balanced literacy is a framework of instruction that we'll be talking about for the rest of today's session. And it might be a term that some of you have heard before, but what is it? What exactly does it mean? It's more than just a buzzword that's getting thrown around. So balanced literacy combines the best of 2 elements, skill instruction and authentic texts. For some of you of a certain age, like myself, you might remember the reading wars, or what was made out to be the reading wars between skill instruction or whole language. So reading books minus skill instruction. It was kind of pitted as an either or. But balanced literacy really recognizes the value of both of these approaches, and it combines them. So when I say skill instruction, what I mean is instruction in discrete steps needed to succeed in the reading process. So for example, phonics. And in order to have successful skills instruction, there does need to be some direct explicit instruction. So for example, the letter S makes the S sound. That's an element of instruction that our early readers need to know, our pre-readers. And skill instruction is also systematic. It follows a scope and sequence. It's intentional. And then authentic texts, these are simply texts that can be encountered in daily life. Books, newspapers, magazines. The purpose of these materials is not to teach reading. Okay, so they are authentic materials that you might encounter in day-to-day life. So what are the components of balanced literacy? There are quite a few components that make up this instructional framework. And depending on what graphic you look at or who you talk to, you might see more components or less components involved. But these are the ones I wanted to highlight today. So I'll just kind of go around the horn here and speak to each, starting with shared reading. So shared reading, this is an interactive reading experience that takes place when students join in and share the reading of the book or some other text while they are guided and supported by their teacher. So if you walked into a classroom, you would see, this generally happens whole class, you would see the teacher and his or her students with the same book open in front of them. And this usually will include a teacher mini lesson. So for example, the teacher might give a 5 to 10 minute mini lesson on making inferences, for example, and then reading that shared text occurs having that purpose in mind. So there's some purpose in reading as a group. The next component is guided reading. This is a critical piece of the puzzle here. So this is where your differentiated reading instruction will occur. You have your small groups of students. They're working at their identified instructional level directly with the teacher. And this is a element that I'll expand on further a little bit later in the presentation. And then another element is word work. And this is a fun one. Students tend to like this little chunk of the literacy block. And this can look different ways depending on the grade level that you're working with. So for example, maybe there is some phonics work happening during the word work period where the teacher's instructing students in the TH, the digraph. Or maybe there are word sorts happening during this time where students are sorting words based on rhyming or a common ending sound. Or for our younger students, our emerging readers, maybe it's a picture sort where they're sorting pictures or images that have the same beginning sound. It could also be a vocabulary element. So for older students, maybe you're working on a Frere model of a target vocabulary word. And then a fourth element is the read aloud. This is one of my favorites just because I always enjoy doing a read aloud for my fifth graders. So what a read aloud really allows the instructor to do is to model proficient reading. So reading with fluency, reading with expression. This is something that some children might not be familiar with, and there are definitely children who struggle utilizing these same elements in their own reading. So I'm sure we've all heard, for those of us who are educators who have been in with younger students, we know what reading without expression sounds like with a very flat affect. So it's important to be able to model that for our students, as well as modeling strategies. So teacher think alouds are a great piece to pull in for these read alouds. So for example, you're reading out loud to your class and you could say, oh, I came to this vocabulary word. I don't know what this word means, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread the sentence. And that's a critical piece for our struggling readers. A lot of times they don't have a sense of what strategy they can use when they get stuck. So when a proficient reader like the teacher makes their thinking visible, that's really beneficial for these kiddos. It also allows for students to be exposed to different topics and genres that maybe they would not have selected on their own or maybe had no prior familiarity with. And these texts can also be at their frustration level. So it might not be something that your students could pick up and read on their own, but it's something where if they can hear it, they can access that content. And that brings us to independent reading, which is my favorite thing to do at home when I have time. So independent reading, this of course would occur at your students' independent reading levels. And really research has shown and been very conclusive in that the only way to become a better reader is to read. I mean, there it is. To become better at reading, you have to read. So allowing time during the school day for this to occur is really important. And it can also be a motivating part of the student's day, because typically what's recommended during independent reading time is that students get a choice in the text that they're able to read. And I'll speak a bit more about independent reading as well in a few. And then we cannot forget writing. So writing is a critical piece of the literacy block. And this can look a variety of ways depending on the teacher's purpose or objective, but it might be students taking some time for journaling. It might be time in writing workshop where the teacher is guiding his or her students through those 5 critical steps of writing. So your pre-writing, your drafting, revising, editing, and finally publishing is a critical piece of that, of the writing component. And this can include a mini lesson as well. Just like there's mini lessons during shared reading, you have mini lessons during the writing block as well. So for example, the teacher reviewing or modeling how to craft a topic sentence with their class. So I have one more poll to share. And this lets you pick more than one answer. So I just wanted to get a check of the participants. Which of these balanced literacy components are you currently using either in your classroom or is being used in your school? And you can check one or you can check all of them. And I can't see people's responses as they come in, so I'll just give about 10 more seconds. Okay. All right. Oh, and I don't know if your results look exactly the same as mine, but I see a rainbow, which I love. So multiple people, or maybe all of you, picked multiple things for this poll. So our highest percentages, we have independent reading and writing right there, neck and neck. And our 2 lowest, the shared and the word work, are at about 70%. But nice representation here. Nice to see that folks are using most or all of these components in their literacy instruction. Okay. So we know what balanced literacy is, what its components are. What might it look like during the school day? Or how can you fit this in or construct your schedule so that you can include these components? So this is just a sample schedule taking into account if you have a 2-hour literacy block, which is common in the elementary school setting. So 15 minutes shared reading. Again, that's the teacher in class working with the same text. And then the bulk of the literacy block, approximately an hour, is the guided reading. So when you're working with your students at their instructional levels. And one of the questions that comes up when thinking about guided reading is, okay, great, I'm working with my small group of students, but I have 30 students in my class, so what do I do with the other 25 while I'm doing this? So one idea, and you may be familiar with the Daily 5, this is fairly popular nowadays. It's Bushy and Moser's Daily 5. They're also called the Sisters. So I think this is so popular because of its simplicity and the ability to let students choose what it is they are doing during the station rotation. So the students you're not working with can either choose to read to self, work on writing, read to someone, listen to reading, so if you have a listening station or a listening center set up in your classroom, and then word work. So that can all be like word sorts, for example, or working on vocabulary graphic organizer. Those are all things that students can do independently as you rotate through spending about 15 minutes or so with your various guided reading groups. And then the remainder of that 2-hour block might look like 15 minutes of whole class word work, 15 minutes working on writing, and then 15 minutes of read aloud. So of course this can be flexible, but this is just an idea of what balanced literacy might look like in your classroom. So now I'm going to focus on two components of balanced literacy, the guided reading and the independent reading. So I will start out with guided reading. So when considering guided reading, the first step is to assess. You need to determine your students' reading levels using some type of formative assessment. And a common one, and one that I recommend, are the IRIs. Okay, individualized reading inventory or informal reading inventories. So what an IRI will do is it'll give you a grade level. So a student is, for example, reading on a 3rd grade level, but it will give you frustration, independent, and instructional levels. So what levels should they be working at with the teacher? Where can they read independently, and where is it just too hard for that particular student? So students are reading different passages. The teacher assesses for accuracy, and then there's comprehension questions for the teacher to ask at the end of each passage. And there's word lists as well to assess word recognition in isolation. So there's a lot of different IRIs. I only have 2 on the screen here. The qualitative reading inventory, Leslie and Caldwell, and then Bader and Pierce's Bader reading and language inventory. And then there's also the Fontes and Pinnell's benchmark assessment system. This is used to determine the Fontes and Pinnell levels A through Z, and you'll be able to gauge your students' independent and instructional levels through this system as well. So what I would like to do actually is, if folks could pull up the group chat, I just kind of wanted to get a sense of what instrument or what tools are currently being used in your school or classroom to establish your students' reading levels. So you can just type that in the group chat so we can all kind of get a sense of what's happening in the world out there or with the participants. Thank you, Megan. We're jumping in first, STAR assessments. Yep, QRI, I see. That's probably the one I've used the most, is QRI. Dibbles, DRA, Fontes and Pinnell every 6 weeks, SRI, Achieve 3000, STAR, STEP, DRA MAP, F&P. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody sharing the tools that you're currently using. Okay. Running records, yes, running records. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So we've established our students' reading levels. Great. Now what? Now what do we do? So this is where the differentiated instruction takes place. It's where you, the teachers, are working to scaffold your students to their next level, and we're working within their ZPDs, their zones of proximal development. So this is where they're getting those teacher-guided gains in reading achievement. So we do need, materials-wise, Leveled Books is a resource that we do need in our classrooms so that we can match our students' instructional levels to the appropriate materials. So using these Leveled Books during your guided reading time, which is approximately 10 to 15 minutes with each of your groups, depending on their level of need. So during this time, the teacher might do a quick book preview, access prior knowledge, maybe pre-teach any vocabulary that you think might be tricky for your students, and then set a purpose for reading. So maybe it's making and confirming predictions, or maybe it's identifying problem and solution. Then the students read independently, and the teacher can rotate around, and you can read with individuals for a few minutes each, maybe work on those running records to measure students' accuracy, and then close out with a comprehension activity and a review of whatever your purpose was. So a review of the problem, identifying the problem and solution. If you're working with younger students, maybe spend some time here working on specific phonics needs as well. An important piece to just keep in mind about the differentiation here, or the guided reading, is to be flexible. So student groups can definitely shift, move around, depending on how they're progressing. So if you continue with those formative reading assessments and you're doing your observations, you're running records, quizzes or benchmark summative assessments, some other performance tasks, you can use that data to move students around to different reading groups. So they definitely should not be fixed. And then we have our independent reading, which was the other piece I wanted to talk a little bit more on. So independent reading levels, those are obtained through the formative assessments we just looked at, like the IRIs, but they can also be obtained a few other ways. So the DRA, some of you typed that in the chat, developmental reading assessment. This determines the independent DRA reading levels. They go from A1 through 80, up through 80. Then there's also Lexile levels. So there's not one test that we can give to determine someone's Lexile level, but there's a lot of partner assessments that will give you that information. So if your students take the Stanford 10 or the Iowas or the Gates-McGinnity standardized tests, those will also provide Lexile levels for your students. And what's nice about Lexiles is they're really everywhere. So you could go on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com and you can see Lexile levels for different books. So you can match them with your students' independent reading levels. And there's also, I didn't put it up on the slide, but there's also the ATOS or ATOS readability formula. So that's through Accelerated Reader. Some people type that in the chat as well. So that Accelerated Reader will also determine students' independent level. It will give them an assessment, give them a score, and then match them with other books that fall into that range as well. So knowing what a student's independent reading level is, you really just want to provide access, again, to quality books. And it's ideally they are leveled books, so you can know that students are reading something that's appropriate for their independent level. High interest, low readability. So those high-low books are really important for especially our older students who are struggling readers. So if you have a 5th grader reading on a 1st grade level, they are probably not interested in content that a 1st grader would be interested in. So books written at a more accessible reading level, but with topics that would be interesting to older students, are really good things to have available in your school library or classroom library. And I actually attempted, we'll see if it goes through. I just put it in the chat, but I don't know if it's sent. I can try again. I was trying to push through 3 websites that you can check out for, they're not FuelEd websites. Maybe that worked. They're not FuelEd websites. It's like the Library Association and things like that, but they just have lists of example high-low books. So if you're just curious what a sample high-low book might mean, and if that doesn't go through for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm clicking submit, but we can maybe include it in the follow-up. So just external resources, you know, not related to FuelEd, but might be useful. Also, in addition to high-low books, books with diverse genres represented, diverse characters are important to have available for your students. And this is really a time where it just makes it a little bit more equitable. We don't know what all our students are doing at home. We don't exactly know how much they're reading at home, but we can at least ensure, okay, our students are reading 20 minutes a day at least because I see them doing it in my classroom. So, excuse me. So we'll look more at motivation and reading time on the next slide, but I wanted to pull up the chat again, even though I personally am not having luck chatting, but I can read your chats. I just wanted to get a sense again from the group. For those of you that have independent reading, and it looked like many people selected that, how much time is allocated a day for your students to read independently? And is there anything that you call it? So a lot of schools will call it SSR, silent sustained reading, or DEAR, drop everything and read. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing that, how much students read in your class independently, how much time they're given, and if you call it anything, I would appreciate that. Oh, I was just informed that the links I was sending out did load for you guys. I just couldn't see it. I think that my group chat just isn't working anymore.
Jill,
I'm told lots of input is
sorry,
coming in right now.
Yes,
thanks,
Jill,
Andrew.
Would you like me to read some of the stuff that's coming in?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you.
All right. Going back to, let's see, 10 minutes every day, IRB, independent reading book. We provide 20 minutes a day of structured, hold on, it just skipped on me. Independent reading is most of the guided reading time not spent in group for grades 1 and 2. Reading workshops at elementary and Panther workout at middle. Varies by grade level, 10 to 20 in primary and 20 to 30 in intermediate, called independent reading. 15 to 20 minutes daily SSR or DEAR. 15 in 6th grade, 15 to 40 minutes K to 2. DEAR and SSR, 15 to 20 minutes SSR. That gives you an example of some of the stuff that's coming through.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate that. I thought people just didn't like the question. Nobody was responding. So thank you, everybody, for that input. That Panther workout, I like that name. I've never heard that. I wonder if that's related to the school mascot. But, and I love some of those numbers. I heard some on the high end, too, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. It's fantastic that you can build time out in your school day for your students to sit and engage in reading for that length of time. There is some research out there which is kind of disheartening, just as a side note, that in classrooms in this country, some students are not actually reading, but 5 minutes during the school day. They're listening to the teacher talk and being read to and talked at, but they are not actually reading, which is kind of shocking and sad. So it's great that you're allocating that much time. All right. Sorry, my slides got a little out of order. This is the one that I wanted folks to look at. So I want to talk a little bit about motivation because, as I mentioned before, the most important thing someone can do to become a better reader is to spend time reading. And if you're not motivated to read, then you're probably not going to do it, just like anything else in life. So I wanted to just put this up here. This is CORI, some of you might be familiar, Concept-Oriented Reading Instruction. This is a model by Guthrie and colleagues, and this incorporates 5 elements that were determined through research to be critical for motivating students. So incorporating student choice, using a wide variety of genres and levels, hands-on activities, themes, which I know a lot of times we think of themes as being for our younger kiddos, but themes are great. They really allow for connections, they allow for relevance, which can be motivating in and of itself. And then social collaboration. So if we're thinking, let's think of something that happened recently. A theme could be Earth Day. Choice, students can choose their own book, maybe The Great K-Pop Tree, that's a great fictional text, or 50 Simple Things Kids Can Do to Save the Earth, nonfiction text, so kids can have a choice. They can collaborate, maybe they can read to younger students, or they can brainstorm a service project, which brings us to a hands-on activity. Maybe it's school-wide litter pickup or battery recycling or something. Can just be really great and motivating for our students. So let me pull this slide back up, because the more motivated we are, the more we will read. And as this table here shows, the most effective way to become a better reader is to spend more time reading, and these results kind of speak for themselves. So student 1 reads 20 minutes a day. That evens out to exposure, or having read 1.8 million words. And in this study, this is discussed in Sally Shaywitz's book, Overcoming Dyslexia. That student was at the 90th percentile on a standardized test. The standardized test was the MAT, Metropolitan Achievement Test. Student 2 read 5 minutes a day. That's only 282,000 words. That student was at the 50th percentile. And then student 3 read 1 minute a day, 8,000 words, and 10th percentile on that same test. So numbers matter. The amount of time spent on the reading text matters. So I will kind of leave you with that thought in your mind. But thinking about balanced literacy and its importance, so one tool that could be used to help facilitate balanced literacy in your classroom is something called Big Universe. So I'm going to throw it back over to Kristin, and she's going to give a brief virtual tour of Big Universe.
Thank you, Jill. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So as Jill mentioned before, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of Big Universe. I'll wait for it to load. Perfect. As you can see in our toolbar here, we have over 13,000 books. And so going back to that idea of access to books and having that huge variety. With this many books, it's awesome because students and teachers have a wide variety to choose from. There's pretty much something for everyone. When you click library, Big Universe has a vast array of genres, and here students can easily find books that align with their interests, and teachers can filter for different book types, which can help them find their need in their classroom. So Jill, asking you a question now while I'm on tour, with your teaching background, what genres would your students get excited about?
Oh, well, I would say, and just looking at your screen here, for some of my, and I taught 5th grade, I don't know if I said that, for some of my reluctant readers, the graphic novels was an amazing find for me and for them. It's a text that you might not encounter as much, but it's really something that my reluctant readers latched onto.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. We also have a list of fiction, nonfiction pairs. The goal is to get students excited about reading by offering both book types. Ultimately, we want to bridge the gap between the two and then foster a love of reading. Another book type that you had mentioned, Jill, is high-low. So being a Colorado gal, figured I would highlight high-low book of Peyton Manning. And as you can see, this will spark the interest of the students with a fun topic such as football. And you can also see, and I believe I can scroll through, but the book's really easy to read, and there's a lot of fun pictures that are kind of stunning graphics for students so that they can kind of maintain that excitement towards reading these books. So the question kind of becomes, with all of these books, how do you manage as a teacher to organize these? And the answer here is a bookshelf. So teachers and students can easily create bookshelves. This is a great way for them to stay organized, and it aids teachers in lesson planning, of course organization, and it saves time, which we all know is a precious commodity in the teaching world. So that sums up my quick virtual tour. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to you, Andrew.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristin, and thank you, Jill, for really a fascinating presentation. And if anyone, Kristin gave a very brief virtual tour, but if anyone would like to request a personalized demo of Big Universe, just let us know via the Q&A panel. Just go into the Q&A panel and type something, I don't know, I'm interested in demo, and hit the submit button. And someone from the Fuel Ed team will be in touch to make that happen. And speaking of the Q&A panel, we still have a little under 20 minutes left, and we do have some questions that have come in from the audience. So let's turn to those. And Kristin, since we were talking with you most recently, why don't I start out with a fairly straightforward question. Is there a limit to the amount of books that can be checked out per student?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is not. So what's great about Big Universe, one of the many things, is you can have unlimited checkouts. You can have a whole school reading the same book at the same time. There's no access issues there. Thanks.
Okay. And let me follow up on that right now with one more question that came in from Kim. Can more than one student access or read a text at the same time?
Yep, and the answer is yes. So it's great. We've seen some of our partners use Big Universe where the whole class is reading the same book at the same time. And so no access issues. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, all right, fine. Jill, why don't I come back to you? Leo writes that they have about an additional 30 minutes for reading intervention outside the 120 minutes for literacy, which includes writing. And he asks, do you recommend teachers use the same resources / plans for this intervention time that they use for guided reading?
That's a great question, Leo. And let me just say, I think it's awesome that that happens outside of the regularly structured block, because the only way to accelerate readers is to give them more time reading, which doesn't happen when they're pulled out of their reading block. So for those extra 30 minutes, I don't think it's bad to use the same resources. I think it's just that the instructional technique should change or be more explicit. So depending on the skill that the student is working on, it could be, I think it's fine to use the same book or whatever curriculum materials are being used, as long as the instructor just changes the technique and makes it more targeted to whatever the individual student or small group needs more help with.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jill. Kristin, let me come back to you for a question that's coming from Jack, who wanted to know, are the Lexile or grade recommendation levels listed for the books?
Yeah, great question, Jack. Thank you for asking. The students can easily search by grade level, which is nice as well. So teachers on their end can also. And on all the books at the bottom, I'm not sure if anyone caught that, it will have the levels and then the numbers corresponding. And you can also search by that. So if your school uses Lexile, we have those listed on the books, and you can easily search within those ranges.
Okay. And Kristin, while we're on the same subject, can the print in the books be enlarged for students that need large print format?
That is a great question. Yes, we have different features that can help with accessibility, and we can dive into that a little bit more too if you have a specific, implementation that you'd like to know more about. Thanks.
Okay, all right, thank you. Jill, why don't I come back to you for a question? I mean, you obviously have tremendous experience on evaluating reading and so on. So a question that came in from Teresa is, are there any free programs available to evaluate high school level reading levels?
Well, that's a great question. I will say that the IRIs, well, I guess you'd have to buy a book, which is usually about probably $30, but it's not a program that you would have to purchase. And there's high school passages and word lists in IRIs, at least the QRI, which I think I mentioned in the chat. I've used the most. So you could use one of those resources. I can't think of any free digital resources right now, but I can try to dig around a little bit, and if we find anything, we can include that in our follow-up communication. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And Jill, I'll stick with you for another question about any ideas that you may have on how to implement guided reading in a high school setting where they have no block classes.
Where they have block classes? Sorry, is that what you said, Andrew?
No, they do not have block classes.
They do not have block classes. Okay, so no. Typical high school setup where they rotate through. I mean, I would certainly suggest attempting a station rotation model. So during your English class, I'm assuming this is asked by a English teacher, so during your English class, have the students rotate. I know this is something that's really typical in the elementary school classrooms, but it is something that could work in high school, and actually we've seen it work in a number of high schools that used a blended learning model. So if you have your small group, your guided students that you're working with, you can have your other students maybe working on computers if you have technology in your classroom or in the computer lab, and then a third group of students doing some type of collaboration activity or small group activity around whatever it is you might be studying with your whole class at that time. So implementing some type of station rotation model with your high school class, I think, could be something worth trying.
Okay. All right, great. Well, Jill, I also wanted to, during your presentation, you talked about the independent reading phase where the students are reading on their own. Someone wanted to know what you recommend the teachers are doing during that period. Do you recommend, for instance, that they model independent reading themselves and sit there and read themselves, or how does the teacher work at that point?
I love that question. So yes, I do recommend that the teacher reads as well, so to model it exactly like was asked in the question. I think that's important. However, I also know very well from my time in the classroom the time, all the things that you have to spend time on. There's only so much time in a day. So I think it's also okay on, not every day, but during some independent reading times, to go around and maybe pull a student and read with them and do a running record. So I do think it's okay to do that, to spend some time doing that as well. So I would say both.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back to Kristin right now. Kristin, for a question. Are the book titles specific to Big Universe, or are there familiar titles available as well?
Great question, Margie. So Big Universe has authentic text, which Jill had mentioned earlier, where they are published through various publishers. I believe we have around 40. So they're kind of a wide range, again, over 13,000. So some are more common, some are less common. Going back to that question of access, so all of our books, we have agreements with the publishers so that any student can access at any time. And so you're not going to see a Harry Potter, but we will see a wide range of books. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, I think that, I hope it does. It certainly did for me, but thank you so much. I think that at this point, we're probably going to, we try not to take it to the whole hour because we know that everyone has a very busy day and needs to get back to it. There are still some questions that we have from the audience that someone from the Fuel Ed team will follow up with you directly to get you an answer, but we're probably going to cut it short at this point. So as I said, if you did ask a question, someone will follow up with you. I also would like you to encourage, before we say goodbye today, encourage you all to visit the Fuel Education website at the URL that's up on the screen for a wealth of resources on reading literacy. And again, as we said, if you want a demo of the product, quickly pop us a note in the Q&A panel right now before we all say goodbye, and we will follow up with you through that as well. So as we wrap up, I want to really thank Kristin Trostel and Jill Marin again for an excellent presentation and a very lively Q&A section at the end. And I'd also like to thank Fuel Education for its support. And one final reminder to everyone on the call today, we will be sending out an email to everyone when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you everyone for attending, and this concludes today's webinar. Goodbye.